Welcome to the Insight Meditation community of Charlottesville, Virginia. You can find all of our program offerings and information about our Sangha at www.imeditation.org. We meet weekly on Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, currently on the Zoom platform for meditation and a Dharma talk given by one of our teachers. We also meet daily at noon Eastern Time on Zoom for sitting practice. We hope you can join us.
So, welcome to IMCC. My name is Jean Van Gemert, but I won't be leading us tonight. I'm going to introduce my wonderful friend and Dharma teacher, Ron Vereen, from Triangle Insight in Durham. And I really want to thank him wholeheartedly for coming. And as we begin, I want to acknowledge first the land here underneath our feet was first walked and settled by the Monacan people. I'd also like a candle, like to light a candle to remind us to keep turning our attention toward the light. Toward the light and the strength of awareness. And may all beings be more aware of kindness and compassion. So I met Ron when we both taught MBSR for many years at Duke Medical Center. We both completed the CDL-3 training along with Ali Rudolph and Susan Stone from our Sangha, and Cynthia Huey and Steve Cyberlin from Durham. And after we completed that program, Ron said, well, let's start a Sangha. So we did. It was a little bumpy at the beginning, but we did, along with Cynthia Huey and Phyllis Hicks, who teaches Insight Dialogue. Ron's a psychiatrist and has studied with Rodney Smith since 1992. He completed the integrated study and practice program at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies with Andy Olinsky and Tarania Ambrosia in 2008. His other teachers have been Shinzen Young, Lee Brasington, and Nariah Liebenson, to name a few. Ron says his best teacher has been his husband, Ricky. They've been together since 1977, married in 2013 once it was legal, and they are the proud dads of 2 kittens. One of my best adventures with Ron was going to India with a small group from the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies, following in the footsteps of the Buddha. It was definitely a big adventure. So thank you again, Ron, for coming.
Thank you, Jean, for that lovely introduction and for your big heart and good friendship. Oh, it's just wonderful. And thank you all for having me. I look forward to our evening together tonight. So we'll move into that. And I understand we do some meditation to start with before we move into the talk. And I think there's a little break between the practice and then the talk. And if I'm getting astray, just let me know anytime, just speak up. And yeah, so tonight I'll be speaking on opening, bearing witness, and moving toward healing. So I'm gonna offer just a little guidance at the beginning of this practice period. If you feel like you don't need that, don't want that, then feel free to just turn the volume off for the first few minutes or so. But I'll just offer that as it's related to what I'm going to be talking about. So just a way of working, with life as it's unfolding with the difficult. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and move into that, and then we'll have a little break, and then followed by the talk. So let me get my bell here. I'll ring the bell one time to start, and then 3 times at the end of the practice period. So just take a moment, and as we begin our practice together, just settle in however that works best for you, to find a posture that supports you. And to settle into this body-mind, sitting here, lying here, standing, whatever position you wish to assume. And if it helps, to just check in with what's happening in the body, the breath, other sensations. Of course, the mind does what it's going to do. There's a way to work with that as well. So if you want to follow along, I invite you to see if you can open now and turn toward what we might consider the difficult. Now, only do so to the degree that you feel ready. Checking one's readiness is very important, so as to not move beyond your window of tolerance. Now, if ready, you might reflect on whatever has been coming up for you as you bear witness to all that is unfolding in the world right now. We don't have to try to prefer one thing over the other or choose something, but just opening and letting whatever's needing to be seen come into awareness. So like Rumi says, welcome and entertain them all. Maybe each has been sent as a guide from beyond. In several ways, we can work with this in our practice. I've been taught 3 questions we can ask at any moment, any time, whether we're formally practicing or in daily. What's here now? How does it feel? And here we're just bearing it down to the second foundation, Vedana, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. Then can I relate to this from a position of awareness? What's here now? How does it feel? Can I relate to this from a position of awareness. Now, at any point, if you feel stretched, agitated, you may just try pausing, saying something like, breathing in, I'm aware of whatever that experience is for you. It can be specific: fear, anger, sadness. And breathing out, I hold this experience in kind awareness and with compassion. Breathing in, I'm aware of whatever the experience is. Breathing out, I hold this experience in kind awareness and with compassion. And if you wanted to add this wish, feel free. May I find peace in the midst of this. May I find peace in the midst of this. So I'll be quiet now. Just practice together. So, welcome back, everyone. Good. Again, it's good to be here with you all. So my topic for this evening's talk is on opening and bearing witness to the difficult. And this is in the hopes of moving us in a direction of greater healing and transformation. So in his exposition on the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha was very straightforward in describing the approach he recommended we take to fully comprehend our suffering, to know its source, to realize how it may cease, and to develop the path of practice that will take us all the way to freedom from suffering. So if we undertake this liberating path, I think you'll agree that we have plenty of work to do, or plenty to work with, especially given the events unfolding right now in the world around us. We probably don't have to look too far, especially in the wake of the recent shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde, and the incidents of gun violence just keep mounting. But you know, our country has been on edge for a while, particularly since January 6th of 2021, and we're now poised to bear witness to the findings of the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. And I can only imagine, for those of you living in Charlottesville, what it may be like to know that it appears the seeds of the January 6th attack were planted with the violent Unite the Right rally in 2017. All of us are likely experiencing a host of difficult thoughts and emotions. And I found this characterization from Gene Nickel particularly poignant. Nickel is a professor at the UNC School of Law and a contributing columnist to the paper here, the News and Observer, where these words from his op-ed appeared on June the 10th. He says this: "Our fights seem endless and unyielding. Vaccines, masks, school books, abortion, critical race theory, guns, LGBT rights, religion, police abuse, immigration, climate, taxes, QAnon. Divisions deepen rather than ease. Animosity grows rather than subsides. And now they're strung together like ever-coiling barbed wire in an increasingly high-stakes political war. Gerrymandering, voter suppression, legislative overrides, elector slates, stop the steal, attacks on the Capitol. Many grow weary and demoralized and scared. The stakes are beyond high. Optimism is beyond low. Trust is nowhere to be found. Leadership is non-existent." He says that's how it seems to him, at least much of the time. So as discouraging as his words may be, as Buddhist practitioners, we do have a lens through which to view them as to how to make sense of what is always unfolding in the phenomenal world. The dukkha arising within samsara. This incessant swirling within us and around us, our intimate interconnection within the vicissitudes of inner and outer life. This is samsara, this transmigration, the round of death and rebirth, and not necessarily of lifetimes, but rather our becoming, our births and deaths of thoughts and feelings and views in each moment, of which there is no cessation until we're free. Until then, we're invited to stay with the intention of not trying to stop samsara, but rather relate to it in a radically different way, to open to it with wise view and intention, using our practice to support us in this endeavor. Dan Siegel suggests an acronym to help remind us of the qualities that can be helpful to bring to our experiences. It's COAL, C-O-A-L, and the letters stand for curiosity, openness, allowing, and loving kindness. So these qualities of heart and mind will hopefully enable us to move more or to more easily rest within samsara and not be thrown off center. as our practice can bring forth a certain degree of equanimity from which we'll have a different vantage point, enabling us to see what is really happening and thus what may be needed in the moment. We call this vantage point the seeing that frees. As when we're there, we're no longer relating from experience, but rather to it, and from a position of a more spacious awareness. We can bear witness to what is happening and move toward what can be a healing and transformation of that very suffering, moving us toward wise action. I'm reminded of what Stephen Levine said when he was asked how he would define healing. He said it really wasn't sure exactly what healing is, but feels it's a transformation that occurs when we touch with mercy, love, and compassion that which we've previously touched with fear, hatred, and aversion. His response doesn't negate any experience as long as we greet it with a curious mind and an open heart. My intention tonight is to invite us to open to the individual and collective trauma that we all have experienced to some degree or another. As Thomas Hubel writes in his book, Healing Collective Trauma, he says this: whether individual or collective, trauma fragments and fractures, disowns and silences, creates denial and forgetting. To assist in its repair, we must choose to acknowledge, to witness, and to thereby feel together what has actually occurred, even the most horrific details we would rather close our eyes to. Because to look away, to dismiss, deny, minimize, or willfully forget is to uphold the institutions of inequality, of inhumanity that created them. So to me, Hubel's words seem like a timely directive, such that if any question for me arises about watching the televised hearings of the January 6th Select Committee, I personally feel it is my duty to do so, to not look away, to bear witness. I plan to talk on the topic of bearing witness and to explore how Dharma practice can support us, particularly in opening more fully to the difficult. I'll also share an intervention I recently learned about that's directed toward treating what's called moral injury, which I'll say more about in a bit. And hopefully we'll have some time for us to share with one another as a way of engaging with our collective experiences. So what about bearing witness? I often think of interactions that have occurred over time in a therapy group I've worked with since 1992. At some point in the group process, an individual will share something very difficult and challenging, perhaps locked inside for many years. The sharing is usually followed by another member of the group saying something like, "I'm so sorry. I wish I could do something to help." And then the response from the person sharing the trauma is often along the lines of something like, "You're doing it right now. You're listening." And they may describe a sense of being held and supported by the group. When I hear this, I think of the term bearing witness and how just listening to and holding the trauma and the feelings arising from that can be healing and transformative. And on listening, I like Rachel Naomi Remen's perspective. She says, when we listen, we offer with our attention an opportunity for wholeness. Our listening creates sanctuary for the homeless parts within the other person, that which has been denied, unloved, devalued by themselves and by others, that which is hidden. Listening creates a holy silence. When you listen generously to people, they can hear truth in themselves, often for the first time. And in the silence of listening, you can know yourself in everyone. Eventually, you may be able to hear in everyone and beyond everyone, the unseen singing softly to itself and to you. So I plan to speak to the healing power of opening, bearing witnesses, well as how our meditation practice might facilitate this transformation that Amanda Gorman wishes for us in response to the hurting when we open to the difficult rather than turning from it. So this is just a few lines from her recent poem, Hymn for the Hurting. Thus, while hate cannot be terminated, it can be transformed into a love that lets us live. May we not just grieve, but give. May we not just ache, but act. Maybe everything hurts, our hearts shattered and strange, but only when everything hurts, may everything change. As to how this change may take place, Dr. Christy Pickowitz writes in a piece titled "The Power and Strength of Bearing Witness," that bearing witness assures that our stories are heard, contained, and transcend time. She concurs with Maya Angelou when she said, "There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." From a psychological perspective, Pickowitz says that bearing witness refers to sharing our experience with each other, most often traumatic ones, and is a valuable way to process our experience, to obtain empathy and support, to lighten our emotional load when sharing it with the witness, and to obtain catharsis. From a Buddhist perspective, we can see embedded in this description are the benefits that arise from having spiritual friends, or kalyana mitta, for gatherings like this, and also with the various practices we have to support us. In a similar way, it's not a huge shift to say that when we engage in our Dharma practice, we are bearing witness to ourselves and the difficult experiences and emotions that emerge from living in a world fraught with such turmoil. This can be particularly challenging as lay practitioners in comparison to the rarefied and perhaps more protective environment of the monastic. So Rodney Smith refers to our lay practice as urban Dharma, wherein we follow the Buddhist teachings to examine our experiences in daily life, to move more clearly and to see and comprehend our own suffering in response to what is unfolding around us. And as we open to our own experiences, wise effort invites us to practice being with what is arising and passing in each moment, in as much as possible, opening and turning toward, rather than shutting down and turning away. We receive guidance from our teachers and each other as to the variety of ways to practice in daily life, like mantras such as "this too," or "it is like this," or simply noting yes. It's called yes meditation, as we open more fully to allow each experience. We may benefit from the use of acronyms such as COAL, which I mentioned earlier, or RAIN, R-A-I-N-N. Many of you familiar with: recognize, allow, investigate, nurture, non-attach. These aids act as reminders of how to greet each experience with a more interested and compassionate quality of heart and mind. In addition, there's this thing called mental notation or labeling of the experience, or strong perception as it is termed in Buddhist practice. This can serve as a proximate cause for greater mindfulness, thus leading to greater equanimity. And neurosciences have coined the phrase "name it to tame it," describing how this results in decreased cerebral blood flow to the amygdala, the seat of destructive emotions, and also correlated with simultaneous increase in blood flow to the right prefrontal cortex, an area that helps in affect regulation and internal attunement, as Dan Siegel calls it. If we orient ourselves in this way to the more challenging experiences in our lives, we begin to see that our actions are less driven and distorted. They're less reactive. We allow whatever's there to guide and inform us as to what's needed, so more wisdom can arise, from which wise action can arise. Shenzhen Yang suggests that meditation can help us both love deeply and act effectively as we become more motivated and directed toward wise intention that leads to wise action. We drop the resistance to the unpleasant feelings that may be arising, such as anger, fear, grief, shame, sense of helplessness. The list goes on. after we've learned that the more we resist the painful experience, the more we suffer. The less we resist, the less we suffer. No resistance, no suffering. There's still the pain of it, but no suffering. We then love more deeply as we greet our experiences with more open-heartedness and greater compassion for self and others. Perhaps at some point even dropping the distinction between the two as we come to realize our shared humanity. I want to add here that some concern may arise at times in perceiving that meditation will disconnect us from important issues like the proliferating gun violence all around us, fearing we may go down a self-obsessed search for freedom and ignore taking appropriate action. In an essay on compassionate action by Rodney Smith, he notes these are reasonable concerns to have. However, feels it's important to understand the relationship between a silent mind and a full heart. The chatter in the mind can get in the way, hence contributing to the difficulty in taking the road less traveled, what he calls from head to heart. He says the remedy is learning to listen rather than to assert, to receive rather than to overpower. Here's Rodney's description. When we're receptive, we access the silence within us. Unless we learn to enter this silence, we cannot learn to listen. Unless we learn to listen, we can never connect with all the pleasant and unpleasant shades of our experience. Yet without this intimate connection with our own experience, compassionate action is impossible. When our minds are silent, our sense of self no longer intrudes on our experience. Our heart's compassion is no longer overpowered by our mind's noise. From this silence, we see the world clearly, its problems, the obstacles to solving them, and the value and risk of involving ourselves in a particular problem. Not all problems benefit from action. Some need silence and patience instead. Within a clear mind, there is enormous vitality and passion. What is not there is the clutter of thought and feelings that can lead to knee-jerk responses. The clear mind is far-seeing and powerful beyond measure. There is only this truth. Action that follows from a clear mind is compassion. And action can take many forms. First, I want to offer a story from the Buddhist tradition of Zen Master Ryokan, who was called back home by his family so that he might assist them with the problematic behavior of the son of a cousin. His family kept waiting for Ryokan to talk to the son, to try and change him, yet Ryokan never spoke. After 3 to 4 weeks, Ryokan decided to leave, and the family was going, gee, he didn't do anything. So when Ryokan was getting ready to leave, lacing up his sandals, the boy came in to say goodbye. And Ryokan had tears streaming down his face, which opened the boy's heart and irrevocably changed him. And Ryokan didn't say anything. Ryokan cried the boy's tears for him, meeting him where he was. And the power of that meeting was the transformation. He didn't for 1 minute see him as someone who was broken and needing to be fixed. He simply mirrored back the boy's pain. So fast forward from that time to the present, taking a look at how contemporary mindfulness-informed therapeutic interventions promote the processes I've been talking about: opening, bearing witness, moving toward healing and transformation. I'll shift gears just a bit and move us along a continuum from specifically Buddhist practices and talk about an approach for dealing with healing, but still consistent with the healing Ryokan provided for the boy through the nonverbal mirroring back the boy's pain. So back in March of 2022, I had the good fortune of attending a workshop titled Getting to We, the Role of Group in Repair of Moral Injury and Prevention of Suicide. The presenter was Iba Usadi, who shared being a practitioner of mindfulness, and she mentioned bringing this into her work as the founder and executive director of the nonprofit Trauma and Resiliency Resources, TRR. She's the clinical director of TRR's Warrior Camp program and is trained in a variety of therapeutic modalities. And the one she focused on with us was just talking about her equine-assisted psychotherapy. So here's the description she gave for the workshop, as I think it's relevant to the events unfolding throughout the world now, particularly here with the epidemic of gun violence going on in the US. Military veterans, she says, are continuing to die by their own hand. It is critical that we learn how to repair the damage done to people's psyches after serving in a war zone during forward operations. This requires that clinicians learn to identify moral injury as separate and distinct from PTSD, as well as how to engage a military population in treatment, and why working with a herd of horses and a group of veterans is a powerful and effective therapy modality. So as Usadi said, it's important to distinguish between PTSD and what is called moral injury. And according to those working in the field, moral injury runs deeper and is defined as follows. So as I offer this definition, also think about expanding the target population here of vets to anyone who might be exposed to what is listed here. Moral injury entails emotional distress associated with perceived violations of one's moral code and has been proposed to be a possible contributor to self-injurious thoughts and behaviors among military personnel. 3 dimensions of moral injury have previously been empirically derived: transgressions committed by others, transgressions committed by oneself, and perceived betrayal by others. Distinct from PTSD, moral injury runs deeper and underneath the symptoms and is defined as an existential and/or spiritual crisis that can be the consequence of having been trained to override the instinctual aversion to taking life, resulting in damage to one's conscience or moral compass, and is fueling the suicide crisis in the military. She gives an example that after the war in Iraq, more returning service members have been lost to suicide than were lost in the battle itself. So moral injury is a response to what was done to another person on purpose and are acts that cannot be taken back. She added that it's also not limited to military service, although that is her main focus. It occurs in medical staff. For example, during COVID-19, who were instructed to remove patients from ventilators to make room for those who had a higher likelihood for survival. This is called military triage, the practical process of sorting casualties to rationally allocate limited resources. And what about the psyche, the conscience, the moral compass? And consider many other professions and settings where such decisions are made. So here's a question. What's happening in the psyches of our teachers, parents, and children in our public schools, along with the first responders on the scene as the real threat of harm being done by others is mounting? And other questions. What if teachers are required to bear arms against their will for fear of losing their jobs? What if they have to actually fire a gun to kill a perpetrator? What if they accidentally shoot an innocent person as the panic ensues? What we are learning about moral injury may now need to be applied not only within our school systems, but also our places of worship and spiritual practice, our medical facilities, our retail outlets. The list goes on with regard to wherever we publicly and privately gather. So in talking about Usadi's work with equine therapy, think about how this might need to be potentially broadened as the phenomenon of moral injury expands beyond the military. The TRR model of equine therapy is called equine-assisted psychotherapy. It's a powerful psychotherapeutic approach that includes horses as part of a psychotherapy team. The other members of the team are a licensed mental health professional and an equine specialist professional. All work with the horses takes place on the ground only. There is no riding. Usadi notes that working with horses can help people discover and overcome unhealthy patterns and behaviors, especially as they affect relationships with other people. This is because the horse, as the nonverbal communicator, think of Ryokan, gives immediate feedback about actions and body language through their own response. Horses are exceptionally sensitive and are able to mirror emotions as well as behavior. The relationship of human to horse is from right brain to right brain. They learn what is going on with their human clients by watching what the horses are doing. So having been exposed to traumatic events can produce a massive upheaval in the psychosensory and somatic arousal system. Symptoms can arise that are irritability, anger, sleep disruption, hypervigilance, and an exaggerated startle response. With multiple traumas, trauma of extended duration, and those which are interpersonally inflicted, this affects the attachment system. This gives rise to many of the symptoms now considered to be complex trauma, some of which are impaired relationships with family and friends, a generalized social withdrawal, and a loss of previously sustaining beliefs, among others. So working in close proximity of horses seems to be of extraordinary help in addressing these challenges. And here are a few reasons. First, horses live in the present moment. Sound familiar? That's what we're trying to do, right? They respond to what is and to intention. Interacting with them teaches mindfulness, which can be a window into reclaiming life as it is lived in the here and now. Second, horses are active. Working with them necessitates movement and grounding, which decreases arousal and dissociation. Mindfulness, grounding, movement, and working in the present moment all increase the individual's capacity to experience the present rather than responding to the traumatic past. And then third, horses are social animals. Their natural curiosity and playfulness is at times so powerful as to supersede their interest in food. Being invited to interact with them overcomes isolation and supports people's interest in novelty. This helps to re-engage the frontal lobes, increasing the capacity to think, consistent with how mindfulness practice has been shown to do this as well, increasing blood flow activity to the medial prefrontal cortex. Fourth, horses are non-judgmental. They accept people and other horses as they are, without bias or discrimination. Again, think of Ryokan and the boy. And fifth, horses live in a herd. They model non-predatory group behavior and can teach people how to interact without violence. So at TRR, they understand that combat veterans don't get traumatized or experience moral injury in isolation. Their trauma and moral injury happens in the context of a highly trained, closely knit, cohesive unit. And so healing proceeds and needs to happen in a unit. In this warrior camp program and all the professional trainings they do, they teach through a group process that involves working with a herd of 7 to 8 horses at liberty. So without any instruments of control or domination. This is of the people and the horses. This is to help participants by observing and interacting with the herd, learn to engage in a way that reduces conflict, both between people and internal to each individual. And finally, Usadi mentions they follow what is termed the TRIBE model, another acronym, TRIBE. So as I read this, see if you can see here the teaching on this, that conditionality. First, tell the story, tell the truth. This is T. R, resolve the past. I, integrate into the new herd. B, build a stronger foundation. E, engage in a new mission. I found this a beautiful description of the process as it points toward a path for potential healing and transformation of such significant hardship. So let's not just leave it with Usadi's descriptions nor my suppositions about the capacity of this form of mindfulness for opening, bearing witness, and moving toward healing and transformation, but include probably the most important piece, and that's what the participants themselves have to say about it. So I want to share a short video. It's about 4 or 5 minutes from the Trauma and Resiliency Resources. By the way, it's www.trrhelp.org. And so, see if I can pull this up. Hopefully I'm not too technically challenged here. Okay. So hopefully that's coming up for you. And here's the video.
I knew from a small age I wanted to be a soldier. I recall being about 6 or 7 years old, me and my buddies, we'd go out to the trees, we'd break off limbs and pretend we were in Vietnam. And so it's definitely something that I wanted to do since I was a boy.
The reason why I want to join the military is I have a sense of pride in my country. I'm a person who wants to help pay back for my freedom.
You do, and you see some things that a 20-year-old kid shouldn't have to see and do.
It was probably the closest thing to hell that I've ever been through.
The parade ends, the flags get put away, the ribbons get folded back up and put in a box, and we're back home. We have the feeling that we're supposed to do the same thing with it, that we're supposed to forget it all, as if it never happened.
When you're in the VA system, a lot of the therapists and folks you talk to aren't combat veterans, and so there's kind of a disconnect there. There's not that ability to relate.
What we've also learned in doing this work with veterans is that they have essentially lost their herd. Their trauma and their moral injury didn't happen in isolation. It didn't happen to one person by themselves. It happened in the context of a unit and in the context of combat operations. And so in order for them to repair what happened to them, it's not going to work for them going to therapy once a week. Inevitably, they have to come together in a way that they can share not only experience, but compassion for each other. The community that we formed is very much because we understand how horses form community, that their relations with each other are necessary for their survival, and that what they have to teach military veterans is how to be powerful and to learn the non-predatory power of the herd.
This big, powerful, beautiful horse just came over. It was like he could read my emotions, and he was saying, it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. You're at a place now where you can let it out, and everything's gonna be okay.
One of the biggest obstacles I feel that we as veterans have is pride. Is you gotta take a look inside and say, it's okay to feel this way, man.
We deserve life. We deserve to not have to always be on guard, to not have to want to stay and isolate and not enjoy what we fought so hard for.
My granddaughter was born after I got home from Iraq, and I came back from warrior camp. She was at the house. I gave her a hug, and she was 6 years old. And I had to go do something, and I walked out. And she turned to my wife and said, "Nana, Papa's different." And in just that 2 or 3 minutes, she realized that there was a change in me. And my wife told her, said, you never knew Papa before. Papa's home.
So I want to thank you for your attention this evening on this topic, and I hope it was informative and an opening, opening so that we all can bear witness to what is happening around us and move toward greater healing.